My name is Fred Stevens. I'm an old-time resident of the town of Clifton Park. I was born 1939 in the hamlet of Grooms Corners. I attended a one-room school there for a couple of years. And then the tender age of 5 years old, my dad decided that idle hands are the tools of the devil. So we bought a farm and he put me to work for the next 14 years until I started high school. We moved to the Adner Irish farm in 1945. Everything we owned we put on a hay wagon. And one trip we made it from Grooms Corners to the Visher Ferry Road, which is located my farm is located about a mile north of Visher Ferry hamlet. As luck would have it, I met a next door neighbor who happened to be the first town historian, Howard Becker. Well, Howard introduced me, first of all, by taking me out to a couple of local Indian sites in this area. And the one that I always remember was that we traveled to a site up on Lap Road, which is about a mile from here. And there I picked up my first arrowhead. And working with the New York State Archaeological Association and my work nights in Fonda, I was able to begin to decide the dates of these points, and by the concentrations of particular projectile points and other artifacts, I was able to tell whether we had people who were just camping overnight, whether they were hunting in the area, camping overnight, or whether they actually had a village or some sort of a larger village. In the Visher Ferry area, we have very little evidence today of people living here, and that's the problem is that we're standing here in the Visher Ferry Preserve, which is primarily underwater. What we had all through southern Clifton Park were signs of people coming in from outside areas, and this was for thousands of years. Our oldest dated points go back to about almost 9,500 years, and they are fairly common on surface hunted sites all up through the highlands above Visher's Ferry. But when I was a kid, I used to go down the end of this road and I could still pick up pieces of pottery, and that would date from post 500 AD. And then there was another site right across the river which dated right up to the time when the Dutch first settled and then the English traded with the beaver, through the beaver trade. I think they were probably mainly the Algonquin-speaking Mohegan, what Hudson called the river Indians. They were probably living in small family groups. And some of these groups probably stayed here, but one of the things we find is as soon as the Europeans rolled in, the indigenous people rolled out. They did not want to live that close to they wanted the trade, they wanted the goodies they could buy in Fort Orange, but they didn't want people too close to them.
My name is John Shear. I'm the historian for the town of Clifton Park since 1978. The area it's now known as the Visher Ferry Historic and Nature Preserve was originally a place where the Indians raised corn. They would go up to the mountains and hunt during the winter. In the summer they would come down on the river flats and raise corn. And they call this area Canastigione, which means in Iroquois, corn flats. And this is where the first settlers came because they settled along the rivers. New York was settled by the Dutch. And so it was originally Dutch, people of Dutch extraction that settled in our town right along the river. They would come over and farm the land, but go over to the south side of the river to their homes afterwards. However, by 1683 and 84, there were two farms on the north shore of the Mohawk River. A wonderful map that actually shows the fort on the south side of the river, and also it shows the two farms on the north side of the river owned by Jan Liberté and Right-Claes van Vranken. Jan Liberté also was known as Jan Fort because his family, he lived next to the fort at Canastigione, and he took care of the fort, so people began to call their family the Fort family. John Fort had a big family. He had a son named Nicholas, and Nicholas established a ferry across the Mohawk River at that point where his farm was in 1727. The place along the riverfront began to grow. Earlier, in 1708, There were 2 land patents in the area granted by Queen Anne of England to settle the land. So the 2 patents in this area were the Clifton Park land patent and the Canastigione land patent. The land patent wasn't mapped until 1765 because they were so busy fighting the French and the Indians. And this is an original map of these 2 land patents. It's done on sheepskin. What's interesting, this is in 1765, what's interesting is that it shows down here in what was known as Fort's Ferry, down along the riverbank, there were 12 homes, and you can see they're drawn in here. There's 12 homes. And you can see over here a little further, there's a little creek that comes down here, which the Dutch called the Steenekil. We call it the Stony Creek today, and it comes through Visher Ferry. And so these 2 homes here are in Visher Ferry. And the one home was the home of Nicholas Vischer, for whom Visher Ferry is named. He was married in Schenectady in 1735 and came to this area shortly after his marriage and built the back section of the brick house that still stands there. The back wing is the earliest section, probably built about 1740. It's the oldest house in the town of Clifton Park. Now, Ruyt Kleis van Vranken had 3 sons, and his property was divided between his 3 sons. His 3 sons were Everett, Garrett, and Mouse. So many of these homesteads down in Fort's Ferry existed up until 1907, and we have photographs of them that show what these homesteads looked like. Now, the last homestead, the homestead that the Peirce family lived in, probably built in the mid-18th century, was destroyed by vandals in 1971. It's interesting because my wife and I had moved to Visher Ferry in 1971, and a man that we got to know well, we called him the unofficial mayor of Visher Ferry, Douglas Vischer Smith, who was a descendant of the Van Vrankens and the Vishers. He always appreciated the value of this historic hamlet of Visher Ferry, and he always intended to acquire that building down on the Mohawk and move it into Visher Ferry. So he would talk about it, and he invited us to go down and take a look at it. 1 week afterwards, we're coming home from work in Albany, and we're coming home on the south side of the river because we're still exploring the area. All of a sudden we see these flames on the north side of the river, and it was this early homestead that was destroyed by fire.
The Amity Reformed Church Cemetery at Visher Ferry contains the graves of 5 Revolutionary War soldiers who served in the 12th Regiment of the Albany County Militia during the war. However, development of the crossroads began in earnest during the 1780s. The community grew around the Visher lands along Stony Creek, where the Visher family built their home and a grist mill along the road leading from their ferry that brought travelers across the Mohawk River. Settlers began to arrive from New England, seeking new land and new opportunities. The first of these to have a significant influence on the village was Benjamin Mix. Born in Hartford, Connecticut, he established the first store a short distance to the northeast of Visher's Mill and built a tavern across the street that soon expanded to become a hotel that stood for the next 150 years. The Amity Dutch Reformed Church was built a short distance to the east in 1802 near the Van Vranken Farms, providing a religious home for the community. Other mills were established northward along Stony Creek to supply the needs of the surrounding farms and villagers, including a sawmill and a grist mill, alongside a stone bridge that carried the road northward over the creek. The crossroads grew slowly until the construction of the Erie Canal changed everything.
Low bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, for we're coming to a town. You'll always know your neighbor, you'll always know your pal if you ever navigated on the Erie Canal.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take a trip on the canal, and we're going to go through Saratoga County on the canal. So the original canal was only 4 feet deep and 24 feet wide across the top. The enlarged canal was 7 feet deep and 70 feet across the top. And as you all know, the boats were pulled by mules or horses. So here's an 1851 map of the area we're talking about. And you can see the Erie Canal. Here's Klutz Dry Dock, okay? This line is the canal. And you can see how it wanders through Clifton Park. So whereabouts are we? This is the village of Visher Ferry here, okay? And this is Ferry Drive. This is the Stony Creek. And so it comes right along, parallels the river here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be traveling along here. So at the main entrance of the preserve, which is on Riverview Road, we have this Whipple Truss Bridge, which is the type of bridge that was used all along the canal. The iron bridges were more or less public bridges. The farmers' bridges were made of wood. You'll pass this house as we go down. John Clute built this house in 1832. The front of this house faces the canal. The back faces Riverview Road, but the canal was the main thoroughfare at this time. Further on down, we pass this house. This is a very early house right on the banks of the canal. This was owned by the Van Vranken family. For some reason, the tramps, the hobos, traveled on the towpath. And he said they would always stop at his grandparents' house because his grandmother would feed them. And they couldn't figure out how they knew that. Well, evidently they had marked the bridge just before the house, indicating that this was a good place to get a meal. So his grandfather found that out and made him earn the meal. He put him to work in the wood pile. So, so these locks were 2 chambers, they're double chamber locks, so that they could lock 2 boats through at the same time. They could even lock boats going in the different directions at the same time. In 1855, there were 350 boats a day that went through this lock. And so as you approach the lock on either side, it's wider. The canal widens out. They're called the wide waters. And so boats would have to wait their turn to get into the lock. And some canalers are pretty impatient, and they would get into fist fights to see who would go into the lock first. And in fact, some canalers had professional fighters on board, or at least people who really knew how to fight. The Justice of the Peace was not too far from the lock. He was right up on Riverview Road. And we have those records, the Justice of the Peace records for the 1850s and 60s, and they're just full of these incidents that's happening down at the lock. So this is the canal store and the lock tender's house here at Lock 19. So this young man sitting in the middle in the door, that's John Wooden, and he was the last lock tender at Lock 19.
My father was born in 1862, and in his early 20s, he started to work for the state on the Erie Canal, and spent 30 years with him. I came along in 1890, so I've been here a while. When I was about 12 years old, I began to learn how to operate the locks. But my grandfather was a pretty good scrapper, and there was a lot of fighting going on the Erie Canal at that time. They were racing for locks. That I would hear fights outside, and they throw stones and everything else at each other. The Erie Canal created a lot of work in all the small towns. Now you take Visher Ferry. I don't remember the dry docks, but my father remembered them well. At that time, it cost $3,800 to build a canal boat. And the on the handpost.
By the late 1800s, the canal was still an important aspect of life in Visher Ferry, but the cities surrounding the village were changing. The industrial age, with its large factories powered by both technology and the growing influx of immigrants, were transforming Schenectady, Albany, and Troy. For city dwellers looking for weekend escapes in the countryside, a canal town along the Mohawk River provided an ideal day of rest and relaxation. But how to get there? Traveling by train or trolley and then across the river by ferry was one way. Then there was the scenic route along the canal itself, cruising along on the Kitty West from Schenectady. Upon arrival, some of the tourists settled down to a picnic lunch along the canal. Others ventured up Ferry Drive to stop at the general store. A few, planning on a longer summer stay, could check into the Visher Ferry Hotel, built in 1795 and currently operated by George F. Smith. More adventurous souls would continue their walk along Riverview Road to gaze at the many Greek Revival homes and maybe stop to admire the recently built Amity Reformed Church before retracing their steps back to the Kitty West for the return trip. The Van Franken family were among the first settlers of Visher Ferry, moving to the north side of the Mohawk River in the late 1600s. Each generation expanded their holdings in the area with extensive farmland and business interests by the time of the American Revolution. Today, their family connections extend throughout Visher Ferry and well beyond. Recently, several members of the Van Franken family gathered at Groom's Tavern, a historic building that includes a Van Franken room in honor of the family's long history. They recalled memories and told stories of their proud past. These descendants represent the 10th and 11th generations of their family in America, whose immigrant ancestors first arrived in the Albany area from the Netherlands in the mid-1600s.
Roger and I are second cousins because his grandmother and my grandfather were brother and sister.
Well, when I was a kid, often growing up, we always had family get-togethers, birthdays, holidays, and a lot of times it was at my grandparents' house when they lived in Cohoes. But my grandfather loved talking about the Visher Ferry and growing up in the village. So I had a good dose of it from the time I was a child.
I went to the same birthday parties, Christmas, Thanksgivings as my sister did. And we also, if you had birthdays in the summer, you also went to my Aunt Alice's house. She lived on Riverview Road. And the house had beautiful, really wide boards on the floor. And it was just such a continuity of, the house that my great-grandparents lived in. My aunt had a house built from the material that was there.
Born in 1942, and I grew up at 255 Riverview Road. I was fortunate to be in a family where agriculture was still esteemed and hard work was honored. I enjoyed riding horseback and delivering the newspapers in the Visher Ferry area. When I was really, really young, I was told many times by my father that the Van Franken line went for 7 generations of unbroken descent.
When did we learn about family history? I think probably as a babe in arms. My grandfather, that was his favorite topic. If he was rocking a little kid, he was telling stories. And he would tell stories about what he did as a little kid, where he went to school, what he did growing up on the farm. We just grew up learning all about history in general, but the family history was important. My grandfather, Willard Adam Van Franken Sr., he loved kids. So every kid he was surrounded always called him Baba. Nobody ever called him Mr. Van Franken. Our grandfather carved his name in the back of one of the pews of the church. Yeah. It's still there. It's still there. Our families used to go camping, and our fathers used to go fishing with my grandfather, and they were all big fishermen. And they used to just love going up in the Adirondacks, going fishing, and displaying their fish. And
They would have a newspaper spread out like this, and there would be at least a dozen fish on there. Could be lake trout.
Just about always trout.
Yeah,
and
and
they tasted wonderful.
Grandmother sit there and knit all the time
Oh, yes, knitting.
because Willard was gone with my father just fishing for 6-8 hours.
Well, I have a story about George, who was my father's uncle, right? And he was a trained agronomist, an expert in horticulture, and he and your dad were the ones who put the Idlewild orchards and woodlands sort of on the map, winning prizes and international fairs and that kind of thing.
Right across from where I grew
Right,
up was
right.
probably
Yeah.
the most was
Yeah.
the primary orchard. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember his father spraying it religiously.
There's you can see an apple tree here and there.
Yeah.
Still.
And then there was like a wooded section, and then there was another apple orchard
Right.
that wasn't really cultivated when I was a kid. That was kind of dying out.
Yeah, George was the builder of the 255 Riverview Road
oh, your house too?
in 1938, I think it was. No, 1918.
1980.
1918.
Yeah, they said my grandparents' place was probably the second one. McCain's, I think, was
Yeah.
older.
Oh,
And then my grandparents was
1850s.
1892.
mm-hmm.
And then 1918, you said, was
I think so.
George's.
George's, yeah,
And those were the three houses in a row there.
right.
But
Very few new houses in the village, but I can remember walking through there and said, oh, there's a Van Rankin, there's a Van Rankin, there's a Van Rankin. I says, there's a whole lot of them there.
I heard that Willard was one of the last people to actually graduate from the primary school in Visher Ferry.
The one-room schoolhouse.
The one-room
Could very well
schoolhouse.
have been, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I worked for his wife, Patty. I cleaned their house.
Oh,
And one day she told me, she said, we're going to go down and clean out the schoolhouse because they had bought it.
Uh-huh.
I said, oh, okay. So we went down there. She went in for something. She goes, we're not doing it. There's critters in there. The floor had sunk. And so I said, we're not doing it. Somebody else is going to, you're not going in there. I said, okay.
So somebody else did do it finally?
Yes, it's been restored. I used to know everybody that lived in every house in the village. Now, not so much.
It'd be hard.
There's new people coming into the village all the time. If a house comes for sale, it doesn't stay for sale very long. People want to live there. There's people walking all along there all the time. The preserve is down there. So I think that the village there is it's revitalizing, slowly but surely.
My name is George Bonino. I arrived here in Visher Ferry in 1971. I was always of the opinion that I want to raise my family not in the city. We met a lot of friends, mostly people who were coming in about the same time, and became fascinated by Visher Ferry itself, that village, the town, its history, and started to really care about the community.
My name is Pat Hafner, and I came to this community in 1970. And the reason I came was because I married Ernie Hafner. And he had been in the community at least 4 or 5 years by that time. He had been involved in the fire company, and it was a natural segue to be involved in the community. And I'm proud of the accomplishments of the Visher Ferry Association.
The reason I came to Visher Ferry was because of Doug Visher Smith. So Doug convinced me to come to Visher Ferry. Doug had basically some kind of hold on that house and said to me, I'll arrange for your mortgage and you can have this house here. And he did. So I did move into the old Van Rankin house opposite the church.
The association was formed with all of these new people coming in right about 1969. The town was going to take down some mature trees, and they they didn't like the idea. So they got the community together, the people in the hamlet of Visher Ferry, at a meeting to talk about what we could do to save these trees. Well, unfortunately, we didn't save the trees, but we went on to bigger and better things.
Talking a little bit more about what was the impetus to get the Visher Ferry Association going. I think the time had a lot to do with it. It was the early, not so early 70s, 72, 73. And there was a slow but certain build-up towards bicentennial.
Yes.
Everybody was looking forward to bicentennial. Everybody was thinking about what can we do, all the communities, the town itself, the county, and beyond.
And the other thing with the bicentennial was that it started a whole preservation movement.
We were very concerned about the preserve. What became the preserve? What became the preserve was largely parking areas for canal boats. We were scared to dickens that there was going to be a sale by the state. This was surplus property. The sale by the state to sell those to developers because they would love to have the edge of the river. That's what we pressured the state to preserve that area for future potential because it has some of the only intact canal areas that were still viable.
There was an agreement done in 1977 that the state would maintain or own them, but the town would manage.
One of the major goals of the association when it was formed was to create the Visher Ferry Historic District. The preserve came later. The association was established in February of 1973, and they jumped right into it. They wanted to get the community involved. We had social events. We had programs at the church. We had our very first community day in June by 1975. The Visher Ferry Historic District was created. And I think Mark probably had a lot to do with that because you were the head of the Historic Trust at the time.
Doug Visher Smith was extraordinarily important for the preservation and the existence of certain buildings within the village.
I recall not the fact that Doug bought the old store, the old general store, but that it, after it lay abandoned for a while, he, with, as far as I know, his own money, put money into it to stabilize the building and then start to restore it.
The canal days were a critically important thing because they not only educated the public outside of the village, but inside the village.
Absolutely.
These people had forgotten really about why they were there as a village. It was because of the canal.
It involved both the church, the firehouse, and the Visher Ferry Association. So it brought the community together.
That's true.
With a parade.
Yes.
Do you remember the parade?
Yes.
And we had antique cars because I was in an antique car club and I got the antique cars to come and parade. And we had the Brigade of the American Revolution. These were reenactors from the American Revolution, basically a fife and drum group, and they played music for the parade. And we had the kids would decorate their bicycles in parade. When you look at it, it was amazing that this group of people came together, a group of people with a lot of talent, and they really created something special.
My name is Lee Palmer. live in Visher Ferry. This is
Anna Palmer.
And we have a Greek Revival home that was built in about 1849. How did we get here? I got to Clifton Park because I became the director of community affairs about 1977. I didn't make a lot of money working for the town, and I found this old house in Visher Ferry that needed some love. Got to know Visher Ferry pretty well. There used to be canal days down here when I first started working for the town. Canal days were very popular. It was just a good community feeling, a good activity event in the fall of the year. It was a lot of fun. I guess that kind of tilted my thinking towards Visher Ferry. So how did I wind up with this house? It was cheap. I needed a place to live. I really wasn't much of a history buff, but it was pretty inexpensive. I knew I was handy and could fix it up, or at least I knew enough people that would help me that could fix it up, mostly my dad. When I bought the place, it was pretty bad. You could stand inside and look straight through the walls in some places. The shower, I had a dog at the time, loved the shower because the shower was tilted. So there was always water in one part of the old metal shower. She could go and get a drink. Fortunately, I wasn't married at the time. But I don't think Anna would have been too interested in moving in here. It probably took about 10 to 12 years before I would call it somewhat done. We had to put in a leach field, rebuild the foundation, new electrical, new plumbing, new heat system, new roof.
And didn't Kelly and Chris and you all kind of start here at the same time?
Yeah, Chris Nafis, and then there was another couple, Rick and Kelly Tenanini, across from where Chris and Sue live. We all moved in August of '84. But we used to have some outstanding parties here. Nobody ever worried about dropping stuff or damaging the house. You might wind up eating on a piece of plywood on sawhorses, but it was fun.
I met Lee because we both were ski instructors, and so we started to, phone and date and so on. And then I met the people and saw, the horses across the street and the farm down the road, not the street, the road. So it's a much nicer. It's really, I love it here.
In some ways, it hasn't changed very much. I think one of the nice changes was the general store. It gives you a place to go in the morning if you want to have coffee or grab a sandwich and stuff like that. So we're always rooting for the store and her programs. We are on the town's historic register, and one of the building inspectors showed up who I knew. And he said, Lee, why isn't your house on the town historic register? And I said, never really thought of it. If we agreed to maintain the house and keep it of its character and such, we'd get a tax break.
I'm Chris Nafis. I moved here in 1984. I came out of college to work for General Electric's research lab and bought a Greek Revival house. I moved into the ferry the same time as my neighbor Lee Palmer, so we were the two bachelors of Visher Ferry. The house needed quite a bit of work. I've done the roof, brought new power, put septic in, dug out the basement, pretty much stripped the paint, repointed the bricks. The house was built originally in 1833 by Harman Van Franken. His father, Everett Van Franken, was a big person in the town. Harman's wife, Giddy Vischer, was from the Visher side of the hamlet, so they were a pretty well-connected couple. The house was built out of brick. It was the first Greek Revival style house in the ferry. Visher Ferry is a neighborhood or community that where neighbors are neighbors in the truest sense. When I moved here, people came and shoveled my driveway, helped me put a roof on my barn. I didn't even know people. People just showed up and helped out. I just remember the first day moving in the house. just saying, what have I done? You know, but I fixed up the guest house first and got that rented, and then I've been working on the other house ever since.
I've been a member here for 48 years, joined in 1975, and currently the fire company historian. An evening in October of 1946, the Visher Ferry, or Amity Hotel as it was known, which is on the site of the current Station 1 of the Visher Ferry Fire District, burned to the ground. At that point in time, there was no fire protection in the area of Clifton Park, covering Visher Ferry. So after the fire, as the story goes, a group of individuals known as the Young Couples Club decided that since the last gin mill in town had burned down, which is where they often met with this group, that they needed to form some kind of fire protection to stop this event from happening. The fire company, after signing the incorporation documents, brought that before the town board of Clifton Park, who signed off on it on July 14th of 1947. So that's the official date that the fire company uses as its formation date. The company was given a building by the town of Clifton Park, which it currently stands across the way from the main station in Visher Ferry, which we call Station 1A at this point in time, still owned by the fire district, where we keep equipment in our old 1941 parade truck. Consists currently of about 50 active members and another 25 or so life members. So the training requirements, as time has gone on, has increased immensely, and therefore the time it takes to be a volunteer has also changed immensely. Those are some of the reasons why it's been difficult to maintain our membership, because of the requirements of training and the commitment that it takes to do this job. Firefighters are an interesting mix of people. We get all sorts of kind. We get a lot of young people who look at it from the excitement point of view. That's why I joined. I thought it was an exciting thing to do, and it certainly was. Typically, a lot of times though, we get a lot of 30 to 40-year-old members that are joining, looking to do something for the community, to support their community, and join an organization where there's a lot of camaraderie. We do a lot of things together. Our social activities bond us in many ways. We still have firehouse picnics. We still have a social committee that puts together events every month. We get retired members that are joining. We just had, a year ago, had several members over the age of 65 that joined, who were able to do fire police or fire duties on the fire ground where they're not actually going into a burning building. The current fire station that we are at today, that land was purchased in about 1960. Actually, where the hotel that burned, that started the whole organization, that property was actually purchased by the fire district, and the first modern fire station was built on that property. That and another building were built up on Grooms Road at the same time. It was our station number 2. The bond between the fire company and the community is strong. The fire company is one of the places that brings community together. We have our pancake breakfast coming up here. We do 2 every year. The firehouse is packed full of people. We open up the truck room so the kids can come and see the fire truck. There's just a lot going on at those events. The pancake breakfast is very good. You should come and try it.
Amity Reformed Church started in 1802. It was an outgrowth of the Niskayuna Church across the river, and today you can still hear the bells of the Niskayuna Church ring in the morning. Thomas Roman was very good that he kept extremely good notes, and so we have a lot of the original church records, their first consistory meeting and things like that. A lot of the original church members were also Revolutionary War soldiers. Christopher Miller, one of them, donated the original property for the church and the cemetery. The first church building was built in 1802, and they kept it till 1871 when it had deteriorated too much. In 1871, they built another church, which burned down in 1886 at Christmas time. The third church was built in 1888 in sort of the Victorian style, and it's the church that still exists today. It's extremely interesting. If you go up in the attic, you can tell it was built by canal boat builders because it's all post and beam, extremely well built, and it has beautiful stained glass windows. The cemetery was started in 1802, and there's 4 different sections. 2 years ago, we decided we really wanted to work on fixing up the cemetery. We dug and restored about 85 stones, dug them up, put new footings in. We cleaned a lot of the stones. We made new finials for stones that had been missing them. It looks very nice now.
My name's Tim Flynn. I am the pastor of Amity Reformed Church. I'm also an Albany County Deputy Sheriff, and I was involved with a Presbyterian church in Cohoes for a number of years, and there came a point when a representative of this congregation reached out to the Cohoes Church and said, "We're looking for a pastor. We need someone to fill the role. And do you have someone who might be able to help?" And so I was sent on a temporary basis to fill the gap. That was 5 years ago. The people are wonderful, very tight-knit. I grew up in a church that was like that. Everybody knew everybody, and the families were all involved with one another, and there was a lot of friendship, mutual support, and it felt like a big family. And I found that again here. The congregation is just like the church. It's built to last. We have families in this congregation who've been here for generations, some of them 4 or 5 generations.
My name is Patty Van Franken Knowlton. I live in Visher Ferry, have all my life. I grew up in this church from a very small child. I can remember going to Sunday school, being taught Sunday school classes by my aunts, and going through the various classes, and I received my Bible when I was in 4th grade, and I still use that Bible today. Faith, Food, and Fun was an evening social activity for families, and everyone brought a potluck meal. You brought something to share. You had a meal, and you had a short service. That was the faith part. And then you had fun. And it was just some place to get together and share a meal, break up a winter night, and have a lot of fun.
My name is Jessie Flynn. I am Pastor Tim's wife. We have been married for 33 years and have been in ministry the entire time. I am currently the church secretary and tech person. Prior to 2020, there was no multimedia for Amity Reformed Church. 2020 hit, COVID hit, and within the first 3 weeks of lockdown, we realized that we had to come up with something. So we actually started filming Sunday morning services in our dining room and our home. It almost was a new birth of the church. And it's one that we never would have jumped into.
The challenge is, I think most churches are experiencing the issue of not as many people are attending church anymore. We'd like to have a lot more kids. As it stands right now, our median age in the congregation is senior. And we'd like to bring in more young blood. People say that kids are the future of the church. Frankly, kids are also the present of the church. And we'd like to get more young families in. That's the challenge, and how we reach out to the community, how we interact with the community is part of the way in which we try to meet that challenge. Among the things that we're doing right now, we have Bible study on Wednesday night, and it's a small group, but anyone is welcome. And the beauty of that, too, is that with a more intimate group, the discussion is more free. The church is ordained by God, and it's made up of people. And when those two are together, we know we're doing the right thing.
First took the store over. Well, it was, there was hardly any packaged goods at that time. Your spices was all weighed out. They didn't come in packages. Beans come in 100-pound bags. You sold them, weighed them out for the pound. Macaroni come in wooden boxes and 20-pound boxes. Sugar come in bulk. You had to put up everything at that time. Well, I was delivering. Most of your customers would have a 2 dozen eggs that want to turn in for their groceries. And pick them up. I'd come home with 4 or 5 crates of eggs. With eggs. I'd pick up on the route. A lot of them made butter. I used to pick up butter. I don't know what I didn't take in trade for groceries. I had goats, pigs. I get a kick out going to the market and looking at the prices today and then think back to what they was then. Sugar you used to sell for about 6 cents a pound. Prices are way out. Quarter of a pound would be 10 cents. We used to sell coffee at 25 cents a pound. I delivered with horses. I didn't have I was here about 4 or 5 years before I give up the horses. I used to handle feed, fertilizers, dry goods, shoes, hardware, most everything, anything you could think of. Well, I don't know. They had different ideas than I did running the store. They figured that all you had to do was open it up and people was coming and help themselves, and all they had to do was take the money in, I guess, but it don't work that way.
I'm George Donahue, lifelong Clifton Park resident. Lived in Visher Ferry next to the general store for the last 39 years. Co-owned the store. I went for a period of time with Paul and Joanne Coons and Tom and Louise McManus, along with my wife Karen, after a fire here in 2013 that burned the back of it off. We formed a business to renovate the store, and at that point in time we turned it into what it is today. History of the store that I can recall personally is being a general store. It was owned at that point in time that I remember as a child by Olson's. It was called Olson's General Store, and I remember coming here occasionally as a child to do shopping. It was a butcher shop, a feed store, a grocery store, basically where you bought almost everything you needed to purchase. That's the way it was done back in those days, the old general stores. I personally knew him through the firehouse. He taught me how to shoot pool when I was 16 years old. He was quite an old timer and quite a nice man and real friendly guy. And it was really an honor to get to know him. In September of 2013, under new ownership, the back of the building caught on fire and burned the additions that were not original to the building off the back of the building and got into the roof a little bit and did extensive damage. Luckily, didn't damage the internal structure of the building.
My name is Paul Coons. I'm retired from the state of New York, and my wife and I have been renovating historic properties for 30 years now. The process involved in the store is we were coming back from vacation. It was our anniversary, and we went to Cape Cod for our anniversary, and George called us and said, we need to do something because they're going to tear the store down. Got together and formed an LLC, and looking at how to do it and how to do it right. We interested Tom and Louise in it. As they watched us progress, they said, ooh, that looks good.
Ever since we moved there, I had said I would really love to do something with the general store because it's right next door to our house. It was a tack shop at the time that we moved in, And the building was in some disrepair at that time. And I felt that it's really the center of this hamlet of Visher Ferry. The location, the history behind it, the front porch that looks right out onto the crossroads here. It needed to have some sort of business that would bring the community back together. I wrote a business plan at that time. We did a lot of brainstorming, and we kind of landed on needing to bring in food and coffee as a way to get people to actually come to the space. Bring it back to the idea of what a general store would have been like originally as the community hub, much like the church is, the firehouse is. This is sort of the third cornerstone of the village.
So it took just over 2 years to renovate it. And then the first apartment opened up in October of 2015, followed by the next apartment.
Next apartment shortly after.
And then followed by the grand opening of what was the general store, which Louise took upon to run herself, that part of it.
December of 2015, we opened the general store. We were packed those first couple of months because the community had been so eager for us to open and to see what this was going to be all about, that we did very well really right from the beginning, and pretty quickly established ourselves as a place for the community to come and gather. And it's just grown over the last 8 years. We have at this point 4 book clubs that meet here once a month. We have a knitting group that meets every Thursday morning. Numerous other groups that just gather here, friends who come to meet for lunch. We do, in addition to being a cafe and a gift store, we do quite a few events. We were cruising along quite nicely here with our community space when COVID hit, and we immediately had to shut down the inside gathering space due to the regulations there. But we quickly pivoted and started providing like groceries and meals to people in the community. And George and I kind of spent all our time taking phone orders, packing bags, and setting them outside or delivering them to people in the community. So we built a nice patio outside and then ultimately added a pavilion. So we can have like upwards of 40 or 50 people gather outside.
Well, you think about these floors you're walking on. These floors were walked down before the Civil War.
The building is 1850s, and the floor is probably out of a 100-year log. So, you're talking 1700s.
There was a big tree on the property here, a maple tree, that had to be about 150. It was dying, and so we were told we had to take it down before it fell on the building. When we took it down, we had it milled for lumber so that we could recreate or create some furniture from that tree that was original to the property. We had 3 huge communal tables made from that wood that are now outside under our pavilion that are a piece of history of this store and the property, and we have customers sit around them every day and break bread and share a meal over this table made from something that goes back to well before the store was probably even built.
In 1850, at the age of 30, Isaac Mull married Emily Jane Cooper, and soon thereafter built a Greek Revival cottage just north of the Visher Ferry Crossroads near his harness-making shop. 170 years later, one of the newest residents of the ferry moved into his house.
My name's John Terrio. I grew up in Guilderland. This is Sheree Terrio, and she grew up in Schuylerville. We met in music school at Schenectady County Community College. And we dated for like 3 years. And then when we got married, we ended up in Clifton Park. And we just kind of stumbled upon this area in a way, right? Like, I think it was the general store and the nature preserve is what really drew us in.
The store opened, and I remember it was run down, and it used to be the old tack shop. And then it kind of got reborn. And I went in one day and was like, this is a wonderful place to just do work and have a space where you feel like you're in a little teeny tiny town. We had no idea that there was a little town in Clifton Park. You know, it gets the name suburbia. It's just wonderful having grown up in a small town, having that feel. And then slowly but surely started being a regular there and got to know George and Louise.
Yeah, we started going to church at Amity. We really enjoyed going there. We just bid on this house, not this one, another house down the road, and ended up having some issues with it during the inspection. And somewhere between the time of, you know, initially looking at that house and the inspection, I was like, I'm going to throw one last Hail Mary into Visher Ferry. So I wrote 30 letters or so and mailed them out to all the houses that I liked in the area, seeing if, you know, we love Visher Ferry, we love the church, we love going to the preserve, we love the general store, we really love to be a part of this community. Maybe like 3 weeks later, the owner of this house, Ed, wrote us saying that they were looking to move and looking to sell.
We hit it off with them right away. You know, they put so much work into this house, they didn't want just anybody to get it. And
we came over and we had
tea with them and
showed us all the photos of the house.
We really loved just the property too. We had our, you know, own little piece of heaven out there. We had a pond, we have woods, so it was really, really special. With George Donahue, who knows everybody and knows everybody else that knows everybody. So, which is fine. That's what's great about living here. Like I don't mind that. I don't mind that everybody knows everybody. It's really nice. It's a very unique place in that it's surrounded by a lot of suburbs, right? It's not like a Schuylerville where there's also a Greenwich right next door, or there's a Beacon Hill up the road, or there's a Victory Mills, right? It's kind of a novelty in this area. We have Visher Ferry, everything. You're proud of where you live. Because everyone's like, where's Visher Ferry?
Definitely very proud of where we live.
Yeah. Very, very fortunate.